Hey Tommy, it's great catching up with you.
Good afternoon, Gerald. Great being here.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks for jumping on Backend with me. I'm hoping it to be as exciting as I've been anticipating.
Sure. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so let's get right into it. So the first question at the top of my head, right, just for others who are not conversant with who you are, is who is Tommy, right? So how would you describe yourself to the whole world?
Mm, good question.
Yeah,
I'd say I'd start out by saying I'm a person of many interests.
awesome.
Uh, I'm a lover of life. I like art, I like history, I like politics, I like sciences, and of course, the thing that brings us here, I love technology. So I'd say like I'm a creative, part geek, part creative, part interested in a little bit of nation building. So you always catch me talking, tech, talking politics, talking sports, talking art. I have, many different interests.
Awesome, awesome. That's really great to know. Yeah, I just remembered how we ran into each other at was that not this week in FinTech, the FinTech Happy Hour event for the first
Yes, it
time?
was. Feels like happy hour. Yes,
Actually,
yes.
yeah, yeah. Great meeting you once again. So can you tell me about, I know you've built a series of startups in the past. One of particular interest is TQG. I know you had a startup called TQG. I would like to know more about the startup. I think you
Sure.
exceeded at some point, right? And pivoted into fintech, but I'm more interested in TQG, your experience, how it was building, some of the challenges you faced. Those are some of the things I would like us to get into, just to
Right,
extract lessons from your experience, right? So, but
right,
let's
right.
start with what TQG was all about. What were you guys trying to do at TQG?
Right. So TQG was like the name of the company. The
Okay.
product that we were known for was TQ Trivia.
Oh,
And TQ Trivia was a social game that was targeted at Gen Z and millennials. It allowed so just think of like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, like almost like a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire experience, but multiplayer, and with a very limited amount of time, 15 minutes. So every night we'd have young people all around Nigeria logging on to the game. They'd answer a bunch of questions within a 15-minute period, and whoever came out with the highest score for the night would win a cash prize.
just
And
at
that
night?
was essentially it. Yes, it was a scheduled live event.
Aha.
Started every single night at 9 p.m. and ended at 9:15
Awesome, awesome. Why did you guys choose to do it at night though?
at night. Um, so we kind of like we did like some testing around this. So we actually started out as a game that people could access at any point in the day. But we noticed that one, there was a massive content problem where you made it like 24/7. So you would need, literally like hundreds of thousands of questions for the game to kind of like work on a 24-hour basis. So kind of like as we thought through that problem of like, okay, how do we one increase the sense of urgency and fun that people have, but also how do we deal with this content problem? One of the things that came to our mind was like, okay, let us condense the amount of time people have to play. And so we went from 24 hours, then we tested, 12 hours, then
Mm.
we tested 5 hours, then 1 hour. We thought it was going to be an hour. But what we noticed when we moved it to 1 hour a day was that people would play for about 15 minutes
Oh,
and wait till the end of the game to see who won. They wouldn't play for the whole 1 hour. And then at that point, we made it a 15-minute game,
mm.
and it worked. So people would come in, they'd play, even at 15 minutes, people would still play for maybe like 7, 8 minutes, and then wait to see who won. Some people would come into the game maybe a little later. Maybe they don't come in at 9, they come in at 9:05, 9:06. They'd play for like 7, 8 minutes. And then at the end of the game, we'd see who had the highest score, and the person would win a cash prize.
Sounds interesting. But I'm also curious to know what specific problem would you say TQ Trivia was solving at the time?
That's a fantastic question. So the way we looked at it was, if you look at tech in Africa, there are a lot of people solving payments, infrastructure problems. But once that layer is built, you need things on top of the fintech that you're going to build. So we started looking at okay, we're looking at the demographics of Nigeria, we're looking at the demographics of Africa. This is a very young continent. I think the average age in Nigeria is somewhere around 18, 19 years old. So you're talking about a lot of very, very young people who have access to smartphones. So the question is what are they doing on their devices? And when you look at the spectrum of activities, you would find out that things around social and gaming are very high. So even if you look at kind of top apps in Nigeria, top 50 apps in Nigeria, top 50 paid apps, for the top 50 apps in Nigeria when it comes to revenue, you would find that mobile games are it's probably half of that list is in the mobile game space. So we know that a lot of young people are playing, they're on their phones playing games. The question for us now, and as also I came from a background where I grew up playing games. I grew up wanting to be a game dev, so I've been very interested in the gaming space. I grew up on AAA games, but obviously with mobile and the way games have evolved, games were becoming more of social casual games. So we just kind of had sessions where we'd go through what we thought could work in the market. Obviously, we had seen trends around real money gaming, with sports betting and stuff like that. So we knew money as an incentive would be something interesting for young people, but we wanted to build it around something we believed would be educational. So at TQ, we always said that we wanted to entertain, educate, and empower young Africans through a fun mobile gaming experience. And so even in the way we built the content structure, a lot of the questions had a mix of things around Nigerian history, African history. We dabble into sports, we dabble into pop culture. It was really a drive to empower people with knowledge that they should know, but for some reason don't know.
Yeah, I'm curious though. Did you ever monetize? And if you did, how? How did you monetize?
Yeah, so we monetized from day one. We monetized from day one, and going back to mobile games. Mobile games monetize through power-ups, virtual goods, and just an ecosystem of virtual products. So the first virtual product we had that we sold was Extra Lives. So if you were playing the game and you answered one question, two questions, three questions, four questions, and you missed a question, your score would be 5. But if you had a power up or an extra life, you would be able to continue. And so people used to buy power ups to kind of increase their score.
Okay. Okay.
So that was kind of our first monetization or revenue model. Then we also had some brand activations that we kind of partnered with brands to do some interesting trivia games for our user base as well.
Awesome.
So as far as monetization, virtual goods number one, but also brand activations later on during the life of the app.
I'm tempted to ask, because I'm sure building something new has its challenges, right? And I'm sure you faced a whole lot of challenges. But before we dive right into the challenges you faced, one question at the top of my mind right now is I would just like to find out, right? Where is TQ today? Did you guys get acquired? Did it shut down? Did you pause the project? So where is it right now?
Right. So TQ had a 2-year run. We were acquired by a media company called Nemja. And we had reached the point where the game had plateaued, and we were trying to figure out like, okay, what's the best way to move forward with it. I think at that point, the different founders had different directions in which like we wanted to go. And so we had conversations with several companies on, just, the different assets we had at that point and what would be useful for different, for like different companies. And, the reason why we worked with Nemzia on the acquisition was Nemzia does a lot of work in marketing, brand activations, and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Trivia is a very interesting way for brands to kind of like teach people about their company, the history of the company, interesting facts about the company and stuff like that. So on one hand, we had like a database of questions that could be used. But at the same time, just even in terms of like the core technology that was built, it could be used by companies to work with brands to engage their users or their customers.
Wow, great. So did you cash out? Did you guys cash out? Well, I was just joking.
I'd say it was a moderate exit. It wasn't anything. And let's put it as I'm not quite retired.
Oh, you're retired, but you're not tired.
A little retired now. I'm just playing.
Yeah, awesome. So challenges are going to come in different phases, right? The challenges while building the product, and then the challenges while running the company, right? Because I know these are two very different things, right? But I would like to start off with the challenges you faced while building this particular product.
Right. So, like they say, problems no they finish. When you're running a startup, all sorts of problems. I mean, I can think of like engineering.
I can relate.
So we had a game that started at 9 p.m. and ended at 9:15, and we literally had tens of thousands of people playing at the same time every night. So you're talking about like just kind of like the load on servers like at that point, and trying to make sure like the game works for everybody at that point. So there were a lot of like difficult engineering challenges we had to work with. I think on the content side as well, just keeping up with the content demand over years was like a significant problem we dealt with. An interesting problem we dealt with in content is you have people who, by way of their exposure or their education, just have like a higher amount of knowledge than the average person. What happens when you have these experts and they're winning every night? If you have someone who's winning the game every single night, then other people never feel like they have a chance
to
win.
Looks fixed.
And they kind of fall off. And then we have a segment of experts. So you're talking about now like building algorithms to like cater to expertise levels. So we could look at someone's performance over time and say like, okay, based on your ability to answer these questions, we believe like you're an expert on this level, and based on your expertise, we'll serve you like questions to match your expertise. And then this person might be a weaker person. We don't want you to drop off because you feel discouraged. So we kind of like customize like the questions that you see when you join the game. So that was an experience. But then when you do that, you now have like issues of how fair is it to the experts, and that kind of stuff. So that was like an ongoing challenge we had throughout the life of TQ. Challenges around kind of like finding great writers, who could think of like creative, because you don't want the same set of like boring questions every night.
Yeah.
So you want to be able to ask questions in new creative ways. You want to be able to dive into categories that are new and interesting. So the work on that side was like also immense. Growth is always a challenge for especially consumer products. And on that side, we worked with I always say like we're one of the pioneers of like influencer marketing in
Uh-huh.
Nigeria. We partnered with Fowles the Bad Guy to launch the product, and he was kind of like a minor investor in the company as well.
Wow.
So him being on board kind of gave us our first boost. And then after that, we had some engagements with him as well. So multiple challenges as any startup would be faced with. But I think just on a high level, those are some of the challenges that we dealt with.
Yeah. Great, great. So, what are the challenges you faced while building company in general, right?
Mm,
Having to work with your co-founders, working with a team, working with your investors, what are
right,
some of those very difficult moments, that you almost quit and then you have
right,
to like literally reinforce yourself
right.
over and over again. Yeah.
So I think the challenges change per company and per your level of experience. So I'd say like when you start out as a founder, a lot of the challenges you're going to face might come from, a limited network or a small network. So you don't know enough investors, you don't know enough engineers, you don't know enough growth people, you don't know the right people, you don't have the right people in your network that if you need a certain resource, you can
You can
reach
heal
out to
up.
one person and say, hey, I need this, and they're able to point you to that resource. So things around like, okay, how do I find good engineers? My first set of engineers need to be A players, or else this doesn't work. How do I find those guys? Okay, when you do find those guys, guess what? I might not have raised $1 million. How do I pay you to make sure like you're engaged and you're not poached by someone else? Obviously you'll have building challenges. Growth is always a problem. It's always, I feel it's the number one problem you face once you take VC money, because at that point everything needs to point back to your company growing. um, I'd say like also challenges have
And you
evolved
have
over.
milestones. You have milestones you've
You have milestones you have to hit. You have
you
to hit.
promised. You
And
promised.
you promise. And a lot of times, I think, you mentioned challenges with VCs. I think VCs are an important part of startups, but a lot of times VCs, if you're not careful, VCs can get you off your train. So you're going in this direction. The VC also has milestones that he needs to hit in order to be able to raise his next fund. And so, a lot of times you might have your vision. That vision might get discarded because there's pressure on you to hit certain milestones by the VC you're working with. So how do you manage those tensions? Um, you know, so like I said, different challenges per country, but also like as you gain experience, the challenges kind of like evolve. Maybe raising your first round isn't as hard as before, but now hitting
Okay.
those milestones is now the challenge.
So I
Go
was
ahead.
going to ask for what your defining moments were for you, right?
Mm,
Those like hardcore moments where you had to literally make a choice. Like, do I want to do this or should I keep going? And of course, I'm guessing you kept going for you to have gotten acquired, right? So I'm also curious to know what was that thing that kept you going regardless of all the challenges, that you faced at that time.
um, so I don't know if there's one defining moment. I think there are a lot of different moments that different moments different key moments on anyone's journey. I think one of the things that has kept me in the game, like with TQ, for example, I was building TQ with people I actually loved, you know.
Wow.
So I
Mm.
started TQ
Your
with
co-founders, right?
my co-founders, yes. One of my childhood friends, Bash, and Emmanuel, who I had met earlier in, like, we started working together in my first startup, but who, like, we became like almost like brothers. And so when you actually enjoy working with people and those people are actually like your people, it helps you get through whatever tough time you're in. Being a solo founder is brutal, is really brutal. If you have like a good network of people around you, it makes those times easier.
Sweet. So if you had a chance to build a startup again, or okay, maybe I'm going a step ahead of myself. Do you intend to build a startup again? Are you going to
Like we say,
build it?
always cooking, always cooking, always in the lab,
Once a
always in the
soldier,
lab.
always a soldier, right?
Yes. Yeah. So definitely, for the last year, for the last 15 months, 12 to 15 months, was working in fintech. But the whole time as well, I'm always, so I'm very creative, and I have an ability to connect dots. So I always have ideas floating around my mind. I think, with TQ, there were some trends I had observed, like just in terms of the way social gaming was evolving, some user behavior in Nigeria, my interest in sports. And I needed a little bit of time for all of that to come together. But by the time I realized, like, okay, this is the problem, and I have a way of solving it. I have a solution in my mind. My creative side started kicking in, and I started thinking of building something new. So currently, I'm working on something in the between the intersection of social gaming and sports, and just based on my experience
You really like
building
gaming.
social products and build. I I'm so, like I always say, like, I grew up wanting to be a game dev. That was my first love. So I'm always very interested in the social gaming space. But even just if you look at what people are doing with their phones, it is such a big part of the mobile experience. And they're just really interesting statistics around social gaming. So if you look at revenue drivers in like the app stores, you'd see like gaming is near the top of the list. So just between my interest in social gaming, my experience in social gaming, and my love for sports, I'm building something in that space that I think is going to be very interesting. We're still a little bit in stealthish mode. I do share what I'm working on, but we're behind the scenes cooking right now.
Yeah, awesome. I can't wait to see. Nice, nice, nice. So, do you, okay, before I ask the question, right, I was going to ask something else, but I think this should come first. Do you think the way we're doing or building startups in Africa, Nigeria precisely, is the right way to go? Having been an exited founder, you've been in the space for a pretty long time. I'm sure you've seen things that are happening. Are we having as many startups scale as fast as they should? Right. And if they're not, if you think they're not doing it the right way, what do you think they're probably doing wrong? And how can we correct what's currently going on? Right. So, first question, do you think startup founders are going about building the right way? And if they're not, what do you think should be done differently?
Right, right. So I think that's an interesting question. And I would say, like, there is no one right way to build a company. There are different kind of companies. You have B2C companies, you have B2B companies, you have bootstrapped companies, you have companies that are raising, maybe donor money, you have people that are raising VC money. And for each of those different models, you need to understand what the game is, essentially. I think, and then also I'm someone who's seen like different phases of like the Nigerian like tech ecosystem. So I'd say like between 2014 and 2016, 17, maybe raising money wasn't as easy. Over the last 3, 4 years, we've seen like significant,
Yeah.
growth in the amount of money being raised. I think the challenge with that is, you know, a lot of startups are raising money on Silicon Valley terms, but like I say, we don't have Silicon Valley customers and we don't have Silicon Valley ARPU.
What
So
do you mean by Silicon Valley customers?
so I'm talking about people with disposable income. I'm talking
Okay.
about global users.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Okay.
you look at average revenue per user. Africa is like near the bottom of the list. So now we have a lot of people building in fintech, and we've had like some major successes, like the Paystats, the Flutaways, the Team Apps, Triple Cash. But sometimes I worry about the sustainability of it. I think the more money you raise, the much higher the expectations are. And if so for me, I think we might run in a situation in 2, 3 years where a lot of startups have raised a ton of money, but they're not able to generate the revenues to justify the valuations that they have. And then at that point, what ends up happening is you end up having like either like devaluations, like it becomes messy, essentially. But so for me personally, I think the way out of that is building global companies. So building companies that are incubated in Nigeria and Africa. So you start out in Nigeria, you might expand to a couple of African countries, but you should have a clear path to going global. Because that is when you are able to get customers and revenue that match the valuations of the terms you're raising on. And I think we've already started seeing signs of that. I think, to be quite honest, the other side of that is, so build a company that's very competitive in the tech space. Your engineering team needs to be like really good. To build a Paystack, Flutterwave, you need really good engineers. To build a product that works, you need good engineers. But the cost of engineers is really skyrocketing right now because engineers have more options than ever before. So the question now is like, how do you afford to keep your A players? If you're earning, like a lot of startups are raising money, but they're barely profitable. So that your star engineer, who's maybe your head of engineering, like how do you keep him? How do you keep your engineering managers? How do you keep your senior product managers? I feel we need to embrace being more competitive and saying like, hey, you know what is stopping me from starting something in Nigeria, opening up an office wherever in Europe, the UK, the US, hiring people there to work for my company and working on sales of whatever product or marketing or growth of whatever product I'm building. And the model that I think, I would say this, like Nigerian startups are modeling after Silicon Valley. And in reality, we should be modeling our startups after the Israeli startup model. And in Israel, what you find is a lot of startups focus on, one, solving big problems that the global tech powerhouses find interesting. So if Facebook comes out today and says, hey, you know what? Artificial intelligence is something that we find valuable. Israeli startups start innovating in that space. They typically focus on B2B products, SaaS products. They start those startups in Israel, and within 12 to 18 months, once they found product market fit, they'll open a sales office in the US or Europe. They'll hire a bunch of sales guys to like sell the product. They'll get feedback. They'll do a little bit of tweaking for like the local market. But they're very focused on building for the globe. And the reason why they do that is because Israel is a country of 5 million people. So for them, they have no illusions of like, hey, we're this big market with 1 billion users. That from day one, they're like, if we want to get 1 billion users, we got to go out of Israel. Now in Nigeria, we have 200 million people. But I always say, like, people is not market.
Yeah.
Like, because you have 200 million people
What's
doesn't have
what's
you
the
have
quality? What's the quality of
market.
the
What's the
people?
quality
Yeah.
of that? If you go beyond Nigeria to the rest of Africa, you actually find that Nigeria is a much more robust market than most of the countries you'd find in Africa. So I think when we think about like the addressable market in Africa, I think that number, to be quite honest, is probably closer to like 20, 30 million people than a billion people. But it's robust enough to pilot a product
Yeah.
and get product market fit.
So how
I think
so how do you balance out the question of having a very peculiar problem you're trying to solve locally, right, versus exporting your solution globally, right? Because from the very beginning, while you're setting out to build or solve that problem, you are building it in the local context, right? Because
right,
there's a
right,
specific need, and
right.
it might not necessarily translate into
Translates to the
exporting.
West. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So
So in those kind
yeah,
of scenarios, how do you think that should work
yeah.
out?
So I think on a foundational level, I think founders should be looking for problems that can scale globally.
Oh,
That's the first place to start.
at least before raising VC funds, right?
Before
If that's
raising
all you
VC.
want to.
I think if you don't see a path to scaling globally, then your model should be different. So
Mm.
maybe you go for, maybe you go for donor money, or maybe you
Like
have
grant.
like maybe
Yeah.
you have like a grant, or maybe you do like an agency and stuff like that. So you're taking in limited amount of money,
I see.
which you'd be able to kind of like pay back some returns on. If you want to go for the mega $20 million round, $30 million round and up, you better have a clear path to like going global.
Awesome. 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 So this brings me back to the initial question I was going to ask, and it's somewhat related, but it's concerning the new startup that you're going to build, right? So now that you've mentioned, you said something about the Israeli model. Is
Right.
that what you're mirroring after? Are you going to be building locally, but with a global market in mind?
Right.
Is that the route you'll be taking?
Right. So the product that I'm working on is something that is global from day one.
Ah, okay.
So already we have users
Practicing
who
what
are
you're
not
preaching.
on the continent. But at the same time, like Nigeria is, our pilot market. It is the market in which we're going to do a lot of the experimenting and, go on that journey to finding product market fit. But already we have, users in the UK, we have users in the US as well.
Wow, great, great. So I think this is bringing me to the very end of my questions, right? So I don't blow you up with with lots of questions. But I think for me, one other question I have is, what is true satisfaction for you? So is it when you exit for $1 billion, or is it when you're like solving real problems? Not to say one is better than the other, but like
Right.
everybody has what they're literally working towards, right? So what will give you that satisfaction and that retirement, like you mentioned earlier, for
Right.
you?
I think for me, I'm not one who's very motivated by money.
Okay.
I'm not very motivated by money. I'm very motivated by building things, by seeing through like my creative ideas. That process of building is something I absolutely love. So I'm always building. If I'm not, I'm like I'm always building or thinking about building. I'm always working on something. I think you need to work on things that you're passionate about. So there's a reason why social gaming is a recurrent theme in my career. There's a reason why social gaming and sports at this junction is kind of like the intersection I want to work in. These are things that I'm very passionate about. These are things that I grew up loving. I think when you work on things you're passionate about, it makes the journey easier. I think I'm very passionate as well about like making an impact in people's lives. And so even if you're getting a bunch of junior engineers who come and work with you and level up and go on to work for bigger companies, you have a satisfaction looking and saying like, oh wow, like this person was working with me, now they've moved on to do A, B, and C. So, I mean, I do want to build a $1 billion company. I mean, I feel like, that's just in terms of my own vanities, let me put it like that. I think that is something that I aspire to. But at the same time, just that process of bringing things to life, of having an idea in your head and then seeing people actually use it, that's the best feeling in the world.
I know.
Best, there is nothing better than that feeling of like, this was a tiny idea in my head. And now I am actually watching human beings like interact with that thing. Amazing feeling.
Wow, awesome. So just two more questions and we're done, right? The first one would be, I'm curious. So what part of your upbringing, right, as a young child, growing up to becoming an adult and becoming a founder, what part of that life would you say played a role in what you ended up becoming or what you ended up doing? I mean, you loved gaming and then you eventually built gaming startups. But would you also say, like your upbringing prepared you for becoming a founder altogether, starting up a business, were your parents supportive? Because I've met a couple of people, a lot of people actually, who their parents were, at some point in time, not encouraging what they wanted to do, and all of that, right? So would you say you had a very supportive family that prepared you for this time? Yeah.
I think in terms of becoming an entrepreneur, I come from an academic family. Both of my parents, my father's a professor, both of my parents doctors. Very strong
Wow.
emphasis on education and going to work. Like there was not much of like, hey, what do you think about business? Like
Yeah.
there was none of that. So I think in terms of my entrepreneurial journey, the biggest impact for me was like going to do university in the US. The US is an extremely entrepreneurial nation, and you are going to school with people who are just doing things. This one is starting a t-shirt line. This one is doing this. This one is doing that.
American dream.
American dream, American dream. And at the end of my freshman year, I met someone called Mike Camphor. Mike Camphor was the nephew. He was a nephew to Muhammad Ali.
Wow.
But he was really just a pit bull of an entrepreneur. And we had a really good friendship. He was into real estate, and I started doing real estate with him. We would go around Indiana and buy up houses and refurbish the houses and sell them for a higher price. And that was really my introduction to like entrepreneurship. And Mike, I was 18 then. Mike was 19.
Wow.
Yeah, and Mike would just be like, dude, like by the time I'm 21, I'm gonna be a millionaire. And he would literally like 3 a.m. call me and be like, hey, what's going on, Tomi? Money don't sleep. Money don't sleep. I would go to his room. I would start working on documents for like amazing guy. I think in terms of becoming an entrepreneur, he's probably the person that has had one of the biggest impacts on me. Like he was literally the one that lit that fire. So I'd say my kind of like exposure in the US is kind of what moved me in that direction. There's really nothing from my background that would have pointed to the fact that I would end up, trying to build businesses and startups.
Wow, great. And then my last question would be, what would you say is your advice to emerging founders, right? Because we have a lot of young people, right? I mean, the rate at which people are building our products is really impressive. People are, just looking out for problems they want to solve, right? So what would you say is your advice for people who are coming into this space, particularly tech for the first time, right? To navigate through the hurdles. Yeah.
Right. So I'll say this based on my own experience. I think there are a couple of things that founders, like young founders, should be doing. I think one, there's this argument of should you work, should you not work, should you work? I feel like there's no one answer to that. I think that working for a startup for a couple of years, like 1 or 2 years early in your career, can be very useful. And maybe not a mature company, like a company that is, early stage, maybe pre-seed to seed. You get to kind of like just see how the machine works. You get to see how engineering team is interacting with design, is interacting with customer support, interacting with co-founders. You pick up a skill that that is transferable to like other experiences and stuff like that. So I think an early working experience in a startup can be very useful. I don't think it's mandatory, but could be useful. I think the other thing that I always advise young founders to do is build that network. A lot of times, your startup is really a result of the network you're in. So if you want to raise money, do you have the right network? If you need a key partnership to get your solution going, how easy is it for you to get in touch with someone maybe in FMCGs or in banking or in the telco industry? Like, can you get into the right rooms to be able to make things happen? That network is literally, if there's anything you should be investing in early in your career, it's investing in building that network. I think the more you invest in those things, so you have the right experiences, you have the right networks, when you do start, it makes the journey easier. And I'll give a kind of an analogy of that was given to me on, like, I was speaking with someone who's built
Yeah.
a lot of companies, actually built a unicorn. But he said something that was very interesting. He said startups are like playing a video game. He said you could take two approaches. In video games, you can, let's say like you're on level 1 at the video game and you meet a boss that is level 20. It would take you maybe 100 tries at level 1 to beat a level 20 boss. But if you go around and you grind, you fight enemies that are level 1, then level 2, and you're picking up levels, and you grind all the way to level 30. When you go back to fight the level 20 boss, you kill him the first time. So startups are kind of like that. The founder is at level 1, the startup is at level 20. If the founder grinds up to level 30 and comes back to deal with a level 20 problem, he kills it the first time. If you are still at level 1 and you're attacking a level 20 problem, you're going to fail many times before you beat that boss. And so I'd say, like, going back, there's no one size fits all answer. But I think there are things that you can do to make your journey as a startup founder much easier.
Wow, this has been great. This has been awesome. This has been exciting. Thanks so much, Tomi, for taking our time. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much.
I loved it. I loved it. Thanks for having me on here.
Sure. Thanks.
Awesome time.
Thanks. Do enjoy your day.
All right. Peace.